The first time I realized my land had been stolen, I was standing on my porch in nothing but a robe, coffee cup in hand, watching strangers tear apart my backyard like they were digging for buried treasure. Bright neon vests, shovels in the dirt, marking flags stabbed into my grass, and not a single word of warning. No letters. No emails. No polite knock on my door. Just the sound of chainsaws buzzing and men laughing on land I legally owned. In the middle of it all, standing with her arms crossed like she was posing for a magazine cover about suburban tyranny, was Karen Peterson, president of the HOA and self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. Her smug smile made my stomach turn even before she opened her mouth. "Morning, Jack," she chirped, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness people use when they think you're too dumb to argue. "We're finally putting this wasted space to good use. Community garden. Isn't it wonderful?" I blinked, not sure if I was hallucinating. "You mean, my land? The land I own?" Karen sighed like I was a stubborn child refusing to share my toys. "Oh honey, it's for the good of the neighborhood. The HOA voted. This is happening." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but Karen wasn't joking. She was standing there like some kind of suburban warlord, deciding what was hers and what wasn't. The landscapers had already started drawing lines for pathways, turning my backyard into their blueprint. Her smug little smirk said everything. She thought she'd already won. I took a deep breath, coffee still in hand, and marched right up to her. "You have 5 seconds to get your people off my property before I call the cops." She chuckled softly, shaking her head like I was a fool. "Oh Jack, you really should read the HOA bylaws. We have full authority to repurpose underutilized land for community projects." I took a long sip of coffee. "And you should read the deed to my house, because this land? It's mine." For the first time, her smile flickered, just for a second. But Karen being Karen, she squared her shoulders and doubled down. "The board has already approved this. We're doing it, with or without your blessing." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Her smugness cracked. "Come on, don't be dramatic," she hissed. I held up one finger as the line rang. "Yes, I'd like to report trespassing and illegal construction on my property." Karen's composure finally shattered. She spun around, snapping at the workers. "Hold off for now." Then she turned to me with that tight-lipped smile of someone who's just been slapped in public. "We'll settle this the proper way." She stormed off, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to walk away. This was only round one. The next morning, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had gotten the message. Maybe the embarrassment of being told off on my own lawn, in front of workers and neighbors, would make her back down. But that hope evaporated the moment I opened my mailbox. A bright yellow envelope from the HOA sat there like a warning shot. Violation notice, trash cans visible from the street outside designated collection hours. Fine, $150. I frowned. My trash cans had been out for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. But that was just the start. The following day, another letter arrived. Violation notice, lawn exceeds acceptable height by 1 inch. Fine, $200. The day after that, a ticket for parking my car with the rear bumper extending 2 inches over the curb. Fine, $175. It was clear, Karen wasn't backing down. She was escalating. And this wasn't about rules. It was personal. But the real slap came later that week when a local news van parked in front of my house. I watched through the window, coffee in hand, as Karen stood on my front lawn, crocodile tears in her eyes, speaking into a microphone. She painted herself as a selfless community leader, fighting for the neighborhood's well-being against a selfish, unreasonable homeowner, me. She talked about unity, improvement, and hope, while throwing in just enough exaggerated nonsense to make me look like a deranged loner hoarding space that could feed families. I watched her pretend to choke up, her hand fluttering dramatically to her chest. The reporter nodded sympathetically, completely buying the act. That night, the segment aired, showing aerial shots of my backyard with Karen's voiceover talking about wasted land and a neighbor unwilling to cooperate. My phone blew up with texts, some supportive, others calling me selfish. I realized right then, Karen wasn't playing by the rules. She was controlling the narrative. So I decided if she wanted to play dirty, I'd get creative. Early the next morning, I installed an electric fence. Nothing dangerous, just enough of a zap to send a clear message: stay off my property. I posted signs around the perimeter, clear and legal. That afternoon, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, and waited. Right on schedule, Karen showed up, clipboard in hand, storming toward the fence to take more violation notes. She reached out to steady herself on the fence post and, zap. The shriek that came out of her echoed down the street. She stumbled backward, clutching her hand like she'd been shot, eyes wide with shock and outrage. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Out loud. But instead of backing off, Karen doubled down yet again. The following day, more violation notices arrived, this time not just for me, but for my neighbors who had stopped by to show support. It was clear Karen had started targeting anyone who stood with me. People who'd never been fined before suddenly found themselves cited for ridiculous infractions. One neighbor was fined for having flower pots that were not uniform in design, another for leaving holiday lights up 2 days too long. But Karen wasn't finished. The next morning, I woke up to find my water shut off. A call to the city confirmed my worst suspicion: the HOA had reported my property as vacant and abandoned. I could feel my blood boiling. She wasn't just going after me anymore, she was trying to make my life unlivable. That night, I went through my security footage and caught something that made me grip the armrest until my knuckles turned white. At 2 a.m, Karen, dressed head to toe in black like some budget spy, was on my property. She carried a trash bag and started dumping garbage on my lawn. Then, she stuck a bright pink violation notice on my mailbox, took a picture for evidence, and crept away. She was fabricating violations. She wasn't just bending the rules, she was breaking them in broad daylight, or rather, under the cover of darkness. I knew then that this wasn't about a garden. It wasn't about community improvement. This was personal warfare. Karen wanted to ruin me, and she was willing to drag everyone else down to do it. The following week felt like living under siege. Every morning brought new letters from the HOA, each one more absurd than the last. Noise complaints at times when I wasn't even home. Warnings about overly bright porch lights that apparently disturbed neighborhood harmony. A violation notice claiming my lawn was unnaturally green, suggesting the use of non-compliant fertilizer. It was laughable, if it hadn't been so exhausting. But what pushed me over the edge wasn't what happened to me, it was what Karen did to my neighbors. The Johnsons across the street, a retired couple who had lived there peacefully for over 20 years, suddenly found themselves hit with a fine for having wind chimes that were audibly intrusive. The Adams family next door received a notice about their children's sidewalk chalk drawings, labeled as public defacement. These weren't accidents. Karen was sending a message: stand with Jack, and you'll pay. I saw it in their eyes when they glanced toward my house: sympathy, fear, and something else, the slow spark of rebellion. And then, as if she hadn't gone far enough, Karen took it one step further. Late one night, I woke up to a strange stillness. No hum of sprinklers, no soft trickle from the garden fountain. My stomach dropped. I checked the faucets, nothing. No water. A frantic call to the city confirmed it. The HOA had filed an official report marking my property as abandoned, requesting a suspension of utilities to prevent waste. I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the black window, stunned by just how deep her corruption ran. She wasn't just bending rules anymore, she was wielding them like weapons. The next morning, I called in a plumber to verify that my water lines hadn't been tampered with. He shook his head, disgusted. "Sir, this isn't an accident. Someone signed off on this with city clearance using HOA credentials. They lied in writing." But Karen's mafia tactics didn't end there. The following night, I reviewed my security footage again and caught her red-handed, sneaking onto my property with another trash bag, scattering garbage around my porch, snapping photos to create evidence for a new violation. It was surreal watching the HOA president behave like a criminal. But what infuriated me most was how easily she wielded unchecked power. And then came the final insult. A glossy letter arrived from the HOA board, complete with embossed lettering and Karen's signature. Inside was an offer: they would graciously purchase my property for a price well below market value, citing ongoing conflicts and community disharmony. The kicker? The funds would come directly from the HOA's community improvement budget. She was literally trying to bribe me with money stolen from my neighbors. I could practically feel my blood boiling in my veins. I decided I was done playing defense. I sat down that night, pen in hand, and drafted formal complaints to city officials, copied every piece of video evidence, and prepared for war. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but all she'd done was awaken something she wasn't ready for: my determination to tear down her little empire, brick by brick. The lawsuit arrived on a rainy Tuesday, thick and official-looking, with the HOA letterhead stamped in bold at the top and Karen's name signed in elegant cursive at the bottom. I wasn't surprised, I'd been expecting it. Still, there was something about holding those papers in my hands that made the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. Karen wasn't just trying to bury me in fines and fake violations anymore. She was dragging me into court, hoping the legal system would wear me down where intimidation couldn't. The claims were as ridiculous as they were infuriating. According to the filing, my fence was a public hazard, an eyesore, and a deliberate act of aggression against community unity. They even accused me of fostering an environment of hostility that made other homeowners feel unsafe. I sat there at my kitchen table, flipping through page after page of wild accusations that read more like a personal vendetta than any legitimate legal argument. But I knew exactly what this was: Karen didn't care if she had a real case. She wanted to drag me through as much legal misery as possible, hoping I'd fold. I called my lawyer, Mr. Raymond, who had been helping me quietly from the sidelines. He chuckled dryly after reading through the paperwork. "Jack, this is pure nonsense. But don't underestimate her, people like Karen don't fight fair." And just as he said that, he paused. His voice shifted. "You're not going to believe this, but someone filed an anonymous complaint against me with the state bar this morning. They're trying to get me disqualified from representing you." We both knew exactly who was behind it. Karen was pulling strings wherever she could, trying to cut me off from every resource. But I wasn't about to let her win. A week later, we walked into the courtroom. I wore my best suit, straightened my tie, and felt like I was walking onto a battlefield. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, her expression smug and triumphant, her lawyer beside her, a stiff, sharp-nosed man who looked like he hadn't cracked a smile in years. As the judge entered, a no-nonsense woman with piercing eyes, I could feel Karen's confidence practically radiate across the room. Her lawyer went first, launching into a dramatic performance about how my fence was an intentional provocation and a threat to the safety and unity of our neighborhood. He painted Karen as a brave leader, standing up against a belligerent homeowner who was tearing apart the community fabric. He went on and on, spinning fantasies about my aggression and selfishness. I sat there, calm and patient, waiting for my turn. When it finally came, I stood up, cleared my throat, and placed my property deed on the judge's bench. "Your Honor, this is my land. Not the HOA's, not the community's, mine. Everything I've done has been in direct response to an organized campaign by Mrs. Peterson and the HOA to illegally seize and repurpose property they do not own. I played the security footage, Karen sneaking onto my property at night, planting trash, wielding bolt cutters, and getting zapped by my fence. Then came the part that silenced the courtroom. I handed over evidence of Karen's misuse of HOA funds and read aloud the letter where she offered to buy my property using community money. The judge's eyes narrowed as she flipped through the paperwork, each page sealing Karen's fate a little more. But I wasn't done. I presented sworn statements from neighbors who had suffered years of harassment under Karen's rule, stories of unjust fines, intimidation tactics, and threats to their property rights. By the time I finished, you could hear a pin drop. Karen's smugness had drained from her face, leaving only panic. Her lawyer scrambled, flipping through papers, trying to salvage something, anything, but there was nothing left to say. The judge looked from me to Karen, then leaned forward with a sigh. "Mr. Miller, your property rights are crystal clear. Your fence is legal. You are under no obligation to remove it." She turned to Karen next, her voice cold and firm. "Mrs. Peterson, I am deeply concerned about your actions. You've repeatedly overstepped your authority, misused HOA resources, and harassed a homeowner. I strongly advise the HOA board to reevaluate its leadership before this escalates into criminal proceedings." Karen sat frozen, her world crumbling around her. Her lawyer gathered the papers in defeat. And just like that, it was over. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to go quietly. In the weeks after the courtroom verdict, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer, like someone had finally opened a window after years of suffocating in stale air. Word spread fast. The story of Karen's defeat traveled from one porch to another, whispered over fences and shared in long overdue gatherings of neighbors who had spent too long avoiding each other out of fear. Suddenly, people who once kept their heads down were coming forward with stories of their own, ridiculous fines for garden gnomes, threats over holiday decorations, and demands to repaint front doors that were deemed too individualistic. The floodgates had opened, and the HOA board, desperate to avoid further embarrassment, scrambled to distance themselves from Karen. They called an emergency meeting where, for the first time, the homeowners outnumbered the board members 2-1. The vote to remove Karen as president was swift and unanimous. She didn't even stay to hear the final tally. By the end of that week, Karen had packed up her perfectly curated flower beds and loaded her matching luggage into a moving van. She drove out of the neighborhood without looking back, and no one came out to wave goodbye. In her absence, something remarkable happened. The petty fines stopped. The ridiculous, suffocating rules quietly disappeared. Kids rode their bikes freely, families planted whatever flowers they wanted, wind chimes sang from porches without fear of penalty. The neighborhood felt alive again. And as for me, I threw a party, right there on the piece of land Karen had tried so hard to steal. I hung a massive banner from my fence that read, "Karen's Folly," and the entire neighborhood showed up. We grilled, laughed, swapped stories, and for the first time in a long time, everyone felt like they belonged. When someone asked me what I planned to do with the land now that it was officially and undeniably mine, I grinned and said, "I think I'll build a garden." Everyone burst out laughing. But this time, it would be a garden for us, by us, no ridiculous rules, no power-hungry president dictating what was allowed. Just neighbors, sharing space, living peacefully. And every Christmas since then, I've sent Karen a photo of that fence, just as a little reminder that sometimes, the bully doesn't win. But it made me wonder, how many others out there are fighting their own battles against power-hungry HOAs and impossible rules? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.